Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's really, really good to be here. And I one of the things I love about the job that I do is that I get a chance to come and share time with different people, thinking a little bit about these huge questions of what it is that makes us who we are, what it is that makes the world that we live in, and how we make sense of life. It's just absolutely fascinating to spend some time thinking about these things, and I hope that you will enjoy this evening and enjoy the week as we do that. And just to get us thinking, I want to ask you, just to think about this for me, what would be your favourite daydream? The thing that when you're on your own and you get a little bit of time on your own, maybe it's while you're in the shower perhaps, or maybe you're walking from home to campus or from lecture to lecture or whatever it is, you've got a bit of blank time, when you don't have anything particularly on. Where does your mind tend to take you? What kind of dreams do you start thinking about? Something the sort of thing that will make life feel like you've made it, like it's worth living, like everything's all right. Maybe you start thinking simply just about the next exam, the next assessment, and passing that, and thinking it will be wonderful when it's done, and I know I don't have to redo it. That would be great. Or maybe you start thinking further into the future, and you start thinking about that job that you'll have, which will mean that you'll be able to pay the bills without worrying about them. Or maybe even more, you'll be able to start going on holiday without having to worry about it. Or you'll live in that house of your dreams that you really long for. Or maybe you think about that relationship with that person who you know they exist, but you're not really too sure whether they know you exist yet. And you think, when they know I exist, and then we've got to know one another, then life will be worth living. What kind of daydream does your mind tend to take you to? For some of us, some of those daydreams are precious, precious things. And we keep them buried and we keep them hidden. We don't really want to bring them out, and we wouldn't dare to utter them out loud, because it's almost as if you utter them out loud, it's like you're bringing them out into the light, and they'd just break up, they'd shatter, just from being spoken of. But then other daydreams, other dreams and ambitions that we have, well, those are a lot more obvious. You look around the people that you know in the room, and you'll be able to tell some of the things which they dream about, because it's what drives them. It's the kind of thing that they get up to. It's what drives the kind of thing they get up to at university. It fires their ambition, or it fuels their decisions. It's why they don't do the essay and spend the time with their friends instead, because that's one of the big things. University is about getting to know people and building good relationships and good friendships which are going to last forever. Or it's the reason they don't spend the time with their friends, and they do spend the time working really hard, because they are focused on success, and that's the thing they really long for. They want to be successful in their work, successful in their course, one day successful in their job. That will bring happiness. You can see it sometimes, can't you, as we see one another at work and see one another making the decisions we make. These are the things which drive us, which fire us, which move us forward. And yesterday, if you were here yesterday evening, we were thinking a little bit about one of the things that seems to make us human is we have this insatiable drive for knowledge and a desire to know things and for certainty and to want to know facts that we can construct into truth. But if yesterday we were talking about the drive for knowledge, today I guess one of the things we're thinking about is the drive itself. Why is it that humans are driven for anything? What is it that drives us forward? Someone has once said that what makes us human is having the capacity to imagine a brighter tomorrow and then seeking to make it a reality. Something about being human gives us this capacity to imagine something differently to the way we experience life now and then seek to try and reach it. And the question is, where does that imagination come from? Why is it that we would be driven towards a world which is different to the one that we live in? Where does the idea that we should live in a world which is different to the one that we live in come from? And more pertinently, as you think about the daydreams and think about the things which drive you, how do you know that that daydream would be enough? How do you know that if you realised that thing, that hope, that relationship finally happened, or that exam result happened, or that job you finally got, or that house you finally lived in, or the family that you hope to have one day, or whatever else it might be, how do you know that it would be enough? that would be what life really feels like when you're really living it. Because asking that question just uncovers or lifts the lid on a human predicament that every single one of us faces. We have seemingly limitless capacities for desire. We long for so many different things. And there are so many different potential directions we could go in. I mean, some of you guys just in the last year have made the decision of what course you're going to study at university out of all the potential courses that there were to study. But in doing that, as soon as you start choosing, then you're shutting down other options. And the problem is that all of our desires, they don't match the same level as our capacities. As humans, we're limited. We can't do everything that we might want to do. And at some point, we have to face the fact that we can't do it all. And so our capacities for what we can do are outstripped by our desires for what we might want to do. And that ends up leaving us in a paradoxical kind of situation, a bit of a fix, which is that the more we run after, the more passionately we run after a few things that we want to do, the more often we find other things, other options being closed off to us. And in fact, the more we chase after the thing that we think we want to be free to do, the more potentially restrictive that thing can become. Because it's closing off other options and other chances for us. And our capacities never match our desires. So you might feel like you want to get as much knowledge as you possibly can. But then you walk into just the university library and you think, there's no way I can read all the books. I'll pick one topic. And you find about 5 bookshelves on that topic. So you subspecialise and you find one shelf and you read all the books on that shelf. Maybe you do. You don't really though, do you? You read one book on that shelf and think, there's no way I can possibly know everything on this. But I want to know more, but I can't possibly know everything. So how do I keep going? You make tons and tons of friends in your first term at university, and then you think, you look through your phone, if you had this experience, you look through your phone and you've got names on your phone and you have literally no idea who these people are. And you long for relationships, but actually we don't have the capacity to keep up with all the people who there are. We want to have good quality relationships, but how do you have good quality relationships with all the people that you've met? You can't. In the end, the harder we chase after particular things, the more restrictive they can become. Because our capacities never quite match our desires. And the world whispers promises of fulfillment to us all the time. Things that it says will be, if you get hold of this, life will be brilliant. It will be satisfying, it will be fantastic. And then what happens is our experience is we reach that horizon. We finally feel like we've arrived, and it just turns out that there's another horizon to chase after. Which is what drove Oscar Wilde in one of his plays called Lady Windermere's Fan to famously write this line. In this world there are only 2 tragedies. One is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it. Because when we think we've arrived, it turns out that we haven't arrived at all. It's not the destination we thought it was. And what we thought we wanted, it turns out, doesn't quite deliver what we hoped for. For a lot of years, for about 7 years or so in the northeast of England, I worked as a doctor. I did medicine at Newcastle University. Worked as a doctor for about 7 years. And if you work as a doctor, there are always some patients who you'll never forget. And one of the patients that I looked after, who I will never forget, was a man in his 50s who'd been pretty much one of the most successful businessmen in the northeast of England. He was possibly the richest man in the northeast of England. And I looked after him for a little while. He was in his mid to late 50s. And as I looked after him, he was an incredibly driven, successful, and desperately bitter and unhappy man. Because he had always told himself he would work hard, really hard, accomplish his dreams, take early retirement, and spend time with his wife and his family. He got to the age of about 55 and realised that he had alienated both his wife and his family because he had been chasing so hard after that particular dream. And then a couple of years later, I was looking after him as a man with terminal cancer. who was about to watch everything slip away from him, literally. And he was a bitter man, and he illustrates the fact that so often the thing that we think we want, we might reach it, and it turns out not to be the thing that we wanted after all. At the same time, I was working in the accident emergency department in hospitals in Newcastle, looking after people who were literally killing themselves because they just couldn't quite get enough, whatever it was, alcohol or pleasure or whatever it was, and they just felt they needed more. But it can also look thoroughly respectable and almost completely normal. A couple of years ago, I came across a little story written up about a lady called Sarah. I wonder if you relate to it in any way. You'd have admired Sarah if you'd met her when I did. She was beautiful, brilliant, charming. She was actually the CEO of her company, the life of the party, and she thrived on all that admiration. You could feel it in the razzle-dazzle energy that drew people to her like flame-bound moths. You'd never have suspected that Sarah was an addict unless you'd seen her a few hours after she'd glowingly received an award or ovation when she was curled up in bed, anxious, needy, already jonesing for a fix. See, Sarah was abusing something more powerful, insidious and accessible than any street drug: the adoration and esteem of others that some psychologists call narcissistic supply. Simply put, Sarah was addicted to praise. Her entire life revolved around eliciting positive attention from others, and she succeeded magnificently, but always insufficiently. Being praised launched her briefly into manic giddiness and then dropped her into troughs of depression that made King Lear look like Howdy Doody. You may have some experience with this particular addiction, and actually your background may have put you at risk. If your parents linked their acceptance to your achievements, if you were educated in a competitive system, if you ever participated in sports, theatre, a job, motherhood, in short, if you live in this world, then you've been set up to get hooked on praise. Now, you may be the unusual individual who's untouched by praise addiction. You may savour compliments without wanting them, enjoy performing well even if no one notices, love working whether or not you're succeeding. If so, you have my deepest respect, and it's great that you don't really care that you do. But if you ever walk in Sarah's fashionable, excruciating shoes, seeking approval obsessively, riding increasingly painful waves of hollow elation and overwhelming despair, it's time to sober up. See, sometimes it can look incredibly respectable, it can look incredibly successful, but we find ourselves chasing after something which just won't deliver, trying to grab hold of the wind and coming away with nothing. And the question is, how do we live in a world like that? And how do we cope with that reality that our capacities never match our desires? Should we just diversify, avoid focusing on one thing too single-mindedly? Is that the answer? But more importantly, how do we avoid becoming trapped by the object and goals of our desires themselves? That's a big question for us, and with the title of this week, Made for More, it is a question which gets right at the heart of what we're wanting to think about what it means for us to live in this world. As we said at the beginning, we want to give opportunity for discussion of some of these questions and a chance for people to air their own thoughts about this. Whatever it is that you believe and would say you believe at the moment, we want to give a chance for people to think about it a little bit. And so what we're going to do this evening is have a few moments where we pause and give you an opportunity to talk about it, just where you are. You might want to just talk to the person next to you. You don't have to talk in one massive group around your table. That might be overwhelming. Or equally, you may have come with everybody around your table and think, that sounds brilliant, let's just chat together. That's great. And it might be that you just want to chat about something I've already said and just go, Matt, I didn't agree with that. That's fine. Just turn to the person next to you and say, I didn't agree with that, because that's a great way of starting a conversation. But if you would like them, there's a couple of questions printed on a little bit of paper that looks like this on your table. There's a few on this, but the first two questions, just for this pause, are like this. Where do you recognise the mismatch between human capacities and desires that I've been talking about? Do you recognise it? And if so, where do you recognise it? And how would you advise someone experiencing life like Sarah did? That story that I've just read. We'll give you a few minutes to chat about that, or chat about anything else that you'd like to, just in your tables, and I'll be back in a few minutes' time. Well, I'm just going to break into those conversations. I hope they've been interesting and you've been able to pick up some of those ideas. We'll be able to revisit them in a minute. One of the other things that we want to do in these evenings is, as we think about these really big topics, we want to think a little bit about, well, first of all, the big question is, does God have an opinion on these things? And if so, how would we know? Does he have an opinion on our capacities and our desires and the way in which they drive us? And if so, what does he say and how would we know? But as we think about that, and we'll think about that a little bit more in a moment, we also want to think about how that question hits the ground in different people's lives. So I'm going to invite Caleb up, who's going to come up and just tell us a little bit of his story about how some of these things have affected him. So Caleb, come from me. I think you're on.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, perfect. Brilliant. Caleb, you're sitting very far away. That feels much more natural. Yeah, because this is very natural, as I say.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Caleb.
Hello, I'm Caleb. I'm a first year studying finance and accounting, and I'm from South East London.
Wow, there's the big whoop for South East London. Excellent. And tell us a bit about just your time growing up in South East London, what it was like growing up for you, Caleb.
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian family. My dad was a minister of a church, so I was going to church every Sunday. But I would say, as a kid, I kind of just did see it as something you did each Sunday. You go to school and you go to church on Sunday. And then I think when I got a bit older, I eventually thought about what it meant to be a Christian. Like I knew I wanted to be a Christian, but I didn't know if I really was. So I remember I had one day where I sat down with my mum and I asked, so am I a Christian? How do I become a Christian? And she said, if you believe that Jesus did die on the cross for you and you want your sins to be forgiven, then that's what makes you a Christian. So I went home, I think I was probably, 14 or so, something like that, and I prayed, Lord, please take these sins away from me, Lord, and can I be a Christian? And so from there on I've lived a Christian life from there, and I've been a Christian from there, I'd say. Okay, so
you're at 14 when that happened. And what was life like after that for you?
Yeah, so I would say it gave me sort of like a reason to live my life and act and do certain things. I say, like, as a kid it made it so just things I did, I knew I was doing it for a reason. I was doing it all for God, even though at that age all that really did mean was I did the dishwasher with a bit less complaints and stuff like that. But I remember there was one day my mum said that she really noticed like a change in my attitude towards just my whole life in general. Like she knew that I was doing it for a reason. I found that like super encouraging to hear at the time. I'd say just sort of, yeah, just made my life sort of have a reason, if that makes sense.
And so over that time then life was all plain sailing, since right from then till now, it was all wonderful?
I'd say no. I'd say I've had, it's been a fun journey so far with my relationship with Jesus. I'd say there's definitely been points where I felt a bit weaker. Like I would say sort of, as you get a bit older in the church and you stop having as direct sort of influence from the leaders in the church, I sort of felt that was a point for me where I sort of felt my faith was a bit more hindered. Like church did become sort of just, once again, like I'd go on a Sunday and during the week I'd be with my friends at school and I would just sort of live a life where, from an outside perspective, you wouldn't really be able to tell I was a Christian probably until it got to the Sunday and I was back and I'd be this Christian boy again and I lived that sort of life. And then I'd say that it happened like that for a while until the elders of the church sort of, I think maybe they noticed that, maybe they didn't, but they would put a lot more emphasis into people my age. They sort of got us to do a Bible study together, me and all my friends. And I say that was really helpful for me because it made it so that my relationship with my friends really deepened, and also I was reading the Bible more because we would do it together. I say that really benefited me and my faith, and I'm really thankful to my friends for that now. And I say that really did benefit my faith at the time. And then we had COVID, so it sort of put an end to all of that. And so it meant, couldn't go to church at all. And then I couldn't see my friends at all. and so I sort of felt like I was on by myself again. So went up and down, and then so I wouldn't see my friends for a while, and I really didn't do very well with online church at all. So I really struggled with that. I felt very disconnected from everyone, and I really did feel like I was by myself again. And then basically it just got worse because then everyone went off to uni, and then I went to uni for about a week, and then I decided to leave because I thought I'll wait till COVID is finished and then I'll do it properly. And then I came back home, and then I didn't really have anyone, so I decided I'd commit to church a bit more. I did Sunday school for a little bit, helped teach Sunday school, and then I did some laptop stuff behind the scenes, and I just tried to get a bit more invested in church. And that worked for a while. I was waiting until I eventually went to university properly, and then I was just sort of distracting myself with things until then.
So you're kind of distracting yourself, then you get off to university again. What happened at that point?
Yeah, so I managed to last about 3 months at university this time. So I really struggled with my mental health and depression and just sort of various things, which basically led me to drop out again. So I was back home again with no sort of plans. All of my friends had gone, so it was just me, my very low mental health at the time. So I went to work. I had just no plan for what my life was going to entail. I had no idea what I was going to do. So I would just sort of try to distract myself with whatever sort of things I could do. It was alcohol, or playing just loads of Xbox, or watching lots of TV, or just anything like that. Just any sort of things I could do to find fulfillment in my life, basically. Until I remember there was one day I was sort of having like a really awful day anyway. I had no idea what I was doing in my life. I was thinking, I've left uni, I'm just back home. I was just mopping floors of where I worked. I remember thinking, what have I done? I've left uni, I've got no plans. I felt like a really big failure. And then I remember I had this moment of realisation, basically, that there is someone who does love me, does have a plan for me, and he's been there the whole time, no matter how my life is mapped out and however I thought it was going to go and didn't go how I thought it was going to go. There was someone there for me the whole time. I was getting really emotional because I remember at that moment I really did feel God with me, and I really felt like He was there with me at that moment, and that He does have a plan for me, and that He does love me, and He always has been there with me. And I would say that was what gave me fulfillment in that moment. And then, since then, I've now changed universities. Obviously, I'm now here, and I'm very much enjoying myself here. I like it a lot. So yeah, it's been good since then.
So your experience of experiencing life not being what you'd hoped it would be, finding that for you, your relationship with God was what saw you through, and then now here you are free to be able to actually enjoy university. It's great. So it may well be that there are people, we've already started touching on issues that for some people it's raw and it's painful because life right now doesn't feel like what they hoped it would be, and it feels like there's another horizon to run after, or things just aren't delivering. What would be your advice for people feeling like life isn't quite what they hoped at the moment?
Yeah, so I would say for me, the only thing you can do is just go to Jesus and explore a relationship with Him. Just read the Bible as much as you can and try and deepen a relationship with Him. That was the only thing for me that really made me feel complete. Maybe one of the only things that made me feel happy for a while. It was just knowing that He was there and He did love me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caleb. We're going to hear a song now by someone else who's a part of the Christian Union, Caris. So I'm going to invite her up and we get an opportunity to listen to her and reflect a little bit more on some of these things.
Hello. Oh, here we are. Just going to give me 2 seconds to get myself plugged in and set up. We've been thinking about limitations and everything, and I guess for me, my kind of thing that I always strived after in my life was friendships, and I really struggled whenever I had an argument with anyone, and so much so that it would just basically end the friendship. And I had one of these when I first came to university. I had an argument with a friend who is still my friend now. But I just remember crying in my room and just being reminded that that my identity wasn't in what other people thought of me or the friends that I had. And I'm a bit of a songwriter, so I turned that into a song and wrote this song called Identity, which I'm playing for you now.
Memories keep coming back of the hurt I caused. Makes me wanna veer off track to forget my flaws. I always try to keep my faith that you stick by me. Nature chose to play the ace. Life can turn so easily. I fight between the others and myself, of whether I should be me or someone else. Sometimes I keep flying so low, I forget that I need help to believe that you are with me, that you love me as myself. You're the one that I rely on where I go when I'm in need of a love that's without ending, for you are my identity. Faces turn the other way. Don't wanna take me on. No one comes out to play. What did I do wrong? Help remind me of my strength, the strength you gave to me. You calm me down when I get tense. Life can turn so easily. I fight between the others and myself, of whether I should be me or someone else. Sometimes I keep flying so low, I forget that I need help to believe that you are with me, that you love me as myself. You're the one that I rely on where I go when I'm in need of a love that's without ending, for you are my identity.
Karis. So the question, I guess, is how can Caleb say that when life felt like it wasn't delivering, his relationship with God is what he could rely on? How could Karis sing that when she is looking for a love that's never ending, her relationship with the Lord Jesus, with Jesus Christ, is the one in whom she knows is her identity? And we, as the Christian Union, want to say that the answer to that question, why can people say that, is because of the life of Jesus Christ. On your tables, you have one of these grey books, and I'd love you to grab that just now and just open that up to page 62 for me, or page 61. What you've got here is an account of Jesus' life, possibly one of the most, if not the most famous book ever written in human history. It was written by a guy called John, who was a friend of Jesus. And in the middle of his account, when we're turning to just here, Jesus has been kind of about his business for a little while, and he is building a reputation. And it's worth saying at this point in the account, as you read the story, his reputation isn't entirely a good one, because he keeps on provoking the elite of his day. He keeps on making them angry, the religious elite of his day. He keeps on provoking them because he is saying and doing things that they find absolutely outrageous. And here, we are about to hear Jesus at his most provocative in the middle of this chapter. So what I want you to do actually is just to turn back, if you turn to page 81, just turn back one page to page 80. And the very, very bottom of the page, little number 10, we hear Jesus speaking. He's in the middle of speaking, and he says this: "The thief," he says, "comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep." As I say, this is Jesus at his most provocative. And you might hear those words and go, provocative? Really? That doesn't sound particularly provocative to me. I mean, it sounds a little bit obscure, yeah. He's talking about sheep and shepherds, and it's kind of slightly weird religious language. Maybe it's even slightly lovely. I am the good shepherd. There's something kind of nice. I can picture that put up on a motivational poster somewhere. But provocative doesn't sound particularly provocative to me. But if you want to understand why that is provocative, then what we need to understand is that at the time, these words would not have sounded obscure in any way. If you were one of Jesus' hearers, then you would have been entirely familiar with the concept of sheep farming and shepherding. It was a major part of the local economy. As you would have been listening to Jesus say these words, you might well have been able to see shepherds out at work on the hillside, and you certainly would have known that in the region around there are plenty of wolves with a keen interest in eating the sheep, and frankly, keen interest in eating the shepherds if they could get in the way too. You would have probably known that shepherding was a dangerous job, and you might well have known shepherds who had been at least injured, if not lost their lives to wild animals trying to get hold of their sheep in the region. But actually, these words also would have been deeply, deeply familiar to you for another reason. Because if you were one of Jesus' hearers as he said these words, then you would have been, your entire worldview, your entire way of looking at the world would have been shaped by the ancient scriptures, what we know as the Old Testament part of the Bible. And throughout those writings for centuries, the worldview of Jesus' hearers at the time would have been shaped by some very, very vivid pictures throughout that entire, that run throughout that entire ancient work of writing that we call the Old Testament. And you'd have been standing there going, do you know, it feels a bit like I've heard stuff like this before. In a little bit like if I used the phrase to say that someone was the apple of my eye, you may not even realise it, but I'd be using a phrase directly from an old English translation of the Bible. So many of the phrases that shape the way we think about the world, the images that we use, actually come from old English translations of the Bible. And it would have been similar there. The idea of shepherding and sheep was just in vernacular. It was just normal language that was shaped by these these scriptures, these sacred writings, you've been sitting there going, shepherd and sheep, I've heard something like this before. And actually it would have jogged your memory, because if you were one of Jesus' hearers, it was very likely that you had heard almost every week promises and hopes from that part of the Bible that sounded like this. It is written by a man called Ezekiel. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so I will look after my sheep. In other words, if you were one of Jesus' hearers, as you heard him say these words, your entire worldview would have been shaped by the hope that somehow, some way, God was going to come and shepherd his people, you, like a shepherd shepherds a flock. That is a vivid image that would have shaped your entire view of the world and your hopes for the future. And yet now you are standing there hearing Jesus say, I am the good shepherd. He would not have been able to put it any clearer for you. He is essentially saying, I am God. I am the culmination of all of your hopes and all of your culture's hopes. They are found in me. That is what he is saying as he uses these words, which sounds particularly obscure to us, which explains why, if you turn over the page and look at little number 31 on the next page, on page 64, the people are trying to stone Jesus because they know what he is saying. They hear him claiming to be God and they will not have it. They are outraged by it. So it might seem obscure to us, but actually when you start hearing this language, this is where it starts to become provocative for us too. Because if Jesus is claiming that he is God by using the phrase, I am a shepherd, what does that make everyone else? What does that make me and you? Yeah, according to Jesus, we're a sheep. And we hate that idea. Hate that idea, because sheep, well, they're dumb and they're followers. We know that's what sheep are. It's all about being a follower, being a sheep. And I don't want to think of myself as a follower. I want to think like I'm a leader. And I certainly want to think like I'm free. I do what I want, spending my money on what I want, spending my time how I want, and frankly, identifying myself how I like. That's what freedom is as far as our culture understands it. But Jesus says, no, humans are followers. And in the end, actually, for all of our desires for freedom, it's not that experience and history doesn't teach us that we are free in that way. Whether it's the life of people like my patient that I mentioned earlier, who chase after something and then find themselves enslaved by it, not free to run after it, or Sarah, who finds herself addicted to praise, or in any other countless different way, we are constantly following in a life which just doesn't deliver. And if you want to look at that from a different angle, it's worth asking, what happens if the daydream that you were thinking about at the very beginning comes true? What happens if you do finally reach the thing that is your wildest dreams? What happens then? How do you feel? You've to find people who've done this. One of the best places to look is in the sports arena, to get people who have been absolutely driven to try and win whatever title it might be. There's an amazing story written about Andy Murray when he first won his first Wimbledon title. First man to win Wimbledon in the UK for, 80 years or something it was, since Fred Perry. And there was a little article written up in The Guardian about him by a dear friend of his who was also a sports journalist. And he described what he saw go through Andy Murray's face. Relief, joy, and then finally, fear. Abject fear. And he spoke to Andy Murray afterwards and was like, what's going on? Why are you're obviously anxious and agitated. What's up? And he went, what now? I've just achieved the thing I've been working my entire life for. I'm in my 20s. What now? What do I do with the rest of my life? Jim Carrey, the comedian and actor, said roughly the same thing at an award ceremony. When he was given an award for his greatest achievement, what now? You arrive at the top and you realise there's just another horizon to run after, or there is just nothing there. And it turns out the thing that you've been chasing after has become something that's enslaved you, and it just hasn't delivered. And Jesus says the issue isn't only that they don't deliver, it's also that they don't have our best interests at heart. That the things we chase after become things that we follow, become thieves which steal our joy and end up stealing our freedom. And so Jesus offers his counterclaim. Little number 11, I read it earlier. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. See, everything else, he says, will destroy you, but not me. Everything else will devour you, but not me. I will give life to the full. And the question is, yeah, okay, it's great to hear from people like Caleb and Karis and me and your friends who's a Christian who you came along with, and to hear that from them. But how do we know it's true? How do we know that Jesus really has our best interests at heart when he says something like that? How can we really know that he delivers life to the full? The world is full of power plays. People making big claims, trying to get us to do stuff. Well, did you hear what he said? The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Then little number 14, he says the same thing. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. The answer to how we can know whether Jesus really has our best interests at heart is that because he offers to be devoured for us. When everything else devours us, Jesus lays down his life to be devoured for us. That's why at the centre of Christianity is the death and the claim that Jesus rose again. His death on the cross and the claim that he rose again. A death which the Christian claim is, he died in order to take on all the consequences of all those distorted desires which end up enslaving us when we think that they're going to buy us freedom. A death which literally invented the word excruciating from the cross. And then the proof that he can offer life to the full when he rose again, burst through the grave, and as he put it, takes up his life again. What kind of person says that? I lay down my life and I take it up again, just like I might put down a bag and pick it up again. Either someone who is supremely misguided or someone who is supremely confident that he is exactly who he says he is. And that is the heart of the Christian claim, and the reason why Jesus says he can offer an alternative to all those other things we chase after which end up not delivering. As we said, these are huge things. This is a massive claim. I guarantee this is the biggest claim that you have heard. If you've not heard the Christian claim before, this is the biggest claim you've ever heard. And it's certainly the biggest claim you've heard today, or at least since lunchtime, if you were here at lunchtime. And so it's worth giving you an opportunity to talk about this. We want to do that. And so here's our opportunity again, to just have a chance to discuss these things. A couple more questions that are on that sheet. The second two, they go like this. How does human experience or history confirm or challenge Jesus' notion that we are followers, that we're sheep? Feel free to disagree with it, but say why. How do you see that it's not the case? Or does it actually confirm that we are followers? And how do you react? How do you react to hearing Jesus' language of being a shepherd and of us being sheep? Again, you're quite free to say, I don't believe that. But why not say why? Let's have a chat about this. Let's discuss these things. They're worth discussing. We'll give you another few minutes, and then I'll be back to wrap things up. Together now. And just in order to wrap this up, when John, who wrote this account that you have in front of you, wrote his account, he wrote it because he strongly believed that Jesus wanted to speak to us through it. That Jesus himself actually had things to say, even right up until now, to us through it. And the question would be, well, what would Jesus be saying to us? What questions might he be asking of us? What invitation might he have for us from this little part where he is, as I say, at his most provocative, even if it might feel slightly obscure to us in 2023? And the answer to that is, Jesus simply has a question. And his question, it turns out, is, are you one of my sheep? That's Jesus' question. Are you one of my sheep? And that might sound a bit odd. You might be thinking, surely his question would be, will you become one of my sheep? Like, will you start following me? Isn't that what Christians want people to do, to start following Christianity or whatever it is? But no, it turns out that Jesus actually, he couches the question differently. Let's see if you can hear the way he puts it in these words. Little number 14, if you've got it open on page 62. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And listen to this. I have other sheep that are not of this sheepfold. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. See, the thing is, even right up until the present day, Middle Eastern shepherding is not like, I don't know, Yorkshire Dales shepherding, with one guy sending out his sheepdog and his sheepdog rounding up all his sheep. Now, Middle Eastern shepherding is a lot different to that. To this day, if you wanted to, you could go to the Middle East and you could watch a shepherd actually call their sheep by name, and their sheep recognise the shepherd's voice and follow them. So they will put their sheep together, a number of shepherds will put their sheep together in like a big communal sheep pen, and then the following morning stand outside the sheep pen and call to their sheep, and their sheep and not the others will come out to them. It's remarkable. You can see YouTube videos of it. It's a remarkable thing. Turns out that sheep are trainable, after all. And they're trainable to hear the shepherd's voice. And that is what Jesus is saying. Can you hear my voice? Are you going to be a follower of me? It's a little bit like this. Imagine I'm walking down the road and in fact this happened just a couple of weeks ago, walking down the road with one of my children, and being a 7-year-old boy, he just absentmindedly kicks a stone in the street. Like, we've all done it. We probably all still do it, a lot of us, right? All the time. Except this time, this particular stone bounces in a slightly unusual direction, not one that he was expecting, and then jumps up and hits the side of a rather nice Mercedes standing on the driveway in the next door house. Unfortunately, said rather nice Mercedes is currently in the act of being washed by its owner, who watches the stone hit and says, "Oi!" At which point my 7-year-old son, I kid you not, looks at him, turns around and runs in the opposite direction. At which point I say, "Ezra!" And then amazingly, on this occasion, he stops. It didn't matter the guy shouting "Oi" at him. He knows that's not my dad. But when he hears me calling Ezra, calling his name, at that moment, he did stop. Hold on a second, did I just hear my dad's voice? And on that occasion, he actually did stop. Doesn't always, but he did that time. And it's a little bit like that Jesus is talking about. It could be happening this week. It could be happening tonight. That as you hear Jesus' words, and however obscure they might feel when you first come to them, something nags at you, and it's a little bit like, hold on a moment. Did I just hear God's voice? And John would want to say, yeah, you did. You just heard God's voice. You just heard Jesus calling his sheep away from following other shepherds, which are in the end just going to devour them, and calling his sheep back to follow him. Yeah, you just heard the good shepherd who has laid down his life for his sheep, calling to you. And so his question is, are you one of my sheep? And many people in this tent right now will go, yeah, I am. And I've known I am for some time, and it's great, in which case the answer is, keep following him. Many other people in this tent right now will be going, I don't know. This sounds, maybe I'm beginning to see that it sounds quite good if it's true, but I don't know that it's true. I'm not really sure. In which case I would say, keep looking at him. Keep looking into him. Take a copy of John's Gospel, the account of John, Jesus' life by John, away with you tonight and read it. It really isn't that long. You could read it before the end of the week if you really wanted to. But it might be that some are going, am I hearing God's voice? In which case we would say, keep listening. Keep listening and use this week as an opportunity to respond to hearing God's voice. It might be that just in a moment you want to respond by just turning to the person next to you when we have our final discussion and just saying straight off the bat 3 or 4 words. It could be that you just want to say, tell me more. I'd really like to meet up and read John with someone. Would you do that with me? That would be an amazing thing to do. You could start doing that this week. It could be that you'd want to say, count me in, I want this. In which case, turn to the person next to you and say, count me in. There's someone who you came with, a friend of yours who's a Christian. Say, I want to know this. And they can chat to you about how to do that, or they can bring you over to chat with me about how to do that. I'll be standing over by the bookstall at the end. Or it might be you're going, in which case turn to them and say, this is all rubbish. But be prepared to have a conversation about why. These claims are far too big to simply discount by just saying, I just don't think it's true, without deciding why you think it's not true. So we would urge you, keep on listening. Either way, we're going to have one final opportunity for discussion before we close. And again, just a last couple of questions. They're on that same sheet of paper that's on your tables. And they go like this. Ask, if you can, a Christian friend to tell their story of hearing Jesus' voice. We heard it from Caleb. It'd be really good if you asked a Christian friend if they're feeling brave enough. And I forgot what the other one is. The other one is, what questions would you need to ask to understand what it actually means for someone to follow Jesus? We've talked a little bit about that, but there is no better way of finding the answer to that question than by asking someone who is actually experiencing it. So turn to a Christian on your table and say, these are the questions that I might have. We'll give you a few minutes and then we'll wrap things up. Thanks so much for listening tonight.